Namaste. Good morning. And we are hoping and looking forward to a very calm and a serene weekend for all of us. You've all already seen the subject that we are bringing to you today is a subject on Lord Buddha, the awakened one. We are fortunate in India that out of the 8 significant places of Buddhism, 7 happen to be in India. Buddha is said to have attained the awakening under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, in the present-day Bihar. And in the deer park at Sarnath, which is very close to Varanasi, Buddha is said to have set in motion the wheel of Dharma. Telling us so much more about Buddha and walking literally in his footsteps today is Dharmacharya Shantum Seth. Namaskar, Mr. Seth, and welcome.
Namaste.
He has been ordained as a guiding teacher by none other than the in mindfulness Zen of Buddhist lineage by Thich Nhat Hanh. And we are indeed so very privileged to have you with us today as you're going to talk to us the footsteps of Buddha. Mr. Seth has been working with the World Bank and the United Nations, and how and why Buddhism came to be a way of life for him is also something we hope that he's going to share with us. But before the session started, I asked him that what was the defining moment. And it seems that at an early age of 23, he had to face a car crash, a sports car crash, which made him delve into himself as he learned to fight, I'm sure, something that would have been so very horrific. And he learned on how to find peace and make peace with the things that must have traumatized him in so many ways. And here he is, so very different and so very differently defined, and bringing value not just to his own life, but has become a teacher. He has been a senior advisor to the Ministry of Tourism and Ministry of Culture, Government of India. He's also been training guides for UNESCO, the tour guides who actually help you to navigate through the life of Buddha when you visit these sites. He also has set up the Ahimsa Trust, and today Mr. Seth is in Dehradun as he talks to us. That, of course, is a wonder of technology that binds all of us in times of Corona. So I'm going to pass on the web stage to Mr. Seth. Stay tuned in, viewers. This is going to be a lovely, lovely session, and I'm sure there'll be a learning for all of us. And at the end of Corona, all the places that Mr. Seth shows us today, I'm sure you want to visit them. So once again, a very warm welcome, and the web stage is all yours.
No, thank you very much, Ms. Brar, and thank you for inviting me to share on the footsteps of the Buddha. I'm going to try and do a screen share so that before we get going, I can get, I'm technologically not perfect on these things.
Yeah, we've got it. Yeah.
Okay, and now I need to move something along.
You need the play arrow, right?
To,
right at the top. There is an arrow up in the key bar.
Right. I'm just,
yeah, if you can just take it there.
I'm trying to. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, the cursor just needs to go a little there. Yeah, you got it. Yeah, we've got the full screen now.
Okay. And is your picture on the screen, or is it just the screen, full screen?
No, you and I are also visible on the screen. I'm going to go off camera though and leave you and your presentation.
Okay. No, great. No, I think actually I really want to thank you for putting this whole Apna Desh Dekho webinar series, Ms. Bra, and your team of Meenakshi and Bharti and Feroz and others. I think to actually highlight the history and the culture of India is a very important work anyway, but at this time of COVID, it's particularly good when we should actually recognize our own history and culture. But I think what is important about today's talk is also recognizing the wisdom culture. I think India has this amazing wisdom culture, which is so beneficial at this time of despair, of anxiety, of fear, of really uncertainty. And in this time, we come to people like the Buddha who really help us to understand what is it that what are the teachings and practice that can help us in these times. As we know, the Buddha talked about suffering and the overcoming of suffering. And this is exactly what we are doing in COVID. So thanks so much. Let me just see how this thing works. Yeah, so here is the Buddha himself in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra suggesting that it is important to visit the 4 sites or 4 places associated with his life. The place where he was born, the place where he gained awakening, the place where he turned the wheel of the law, and the place where he attained Mahaparinirvana. And he said it'd be of great benefit. And why? Because it's a sort of way of developing humility, developing patience, touching those seeds in your consciousness which lie dormant when you're in a habituated environment. And I feel that this is a practice of pilgrimage is a wonderful practice. And for more than 30 years now, I've been going to the sites associated with the Buddha. And it's been a wonderful Dharma door, as we call it in Buddhism. It's a doorway to awakening, a doorway to a path. And for me, pilgrimage has become a practice. It's very much what the Buddha suggested. And over this time, I feel I've really got to know the Buddha well, to the extent thinking, oh, where would you have sat? Which mountain would you have walked? Or which rock would you have sat on? And so not just the places, but also the people he met. The young girl Sujata, and then the rivers he crossed, or the caves he sat in. And then slowly, as we read the sutras and the teachings and practice meditation, the Buddha's teachings come alive within ourselves. And hopefully, we can touch the awakened mind within ourselves. And so, meeting the Buddha, visiting the place is a wonderful practice. And I would, as Ms. Brown is saying, I would urge all of you to do it. Anyway, for me, it's my great joy. Every winter I go, and I've been going for 30 years, and now I go probably more than 100 times to all the sites. And I'm never bored of it. So where is this? Now, this is just a map which is showing you in the upper bit, you'll see it's like Lumbini and Sravasti. In the southern bit, you'll see Bodh Gaya. You see a little, on the corner, you'll see a little map of India, inset showing where it is in the modern day states of UP, Bihar, and southern Nepal. That's broadly where so geography of where we are in the Buddhist or the Buddha land, or what we call the middle land. And geographically, or we'd say it's in the Gangetic Plains, just south of where it says Nepal, in that sort of area which is green. Now, all of us, or many of us, are familiar with the story of the dream that his mother Maya Devi has of a white elephant coming from the heavens and placing a pink lotus in her womb. And when she gets this dream interpreted, it's the people say, oh, it's a wonderful dream. You'll have a son who'll be a great king or a great teacher born to you. So this medallion, this piece is actually taken from Bharut, the Bharut relief in the Indian Museum in Calcutta. So we have a combination of art plus, of course, mythical history. And 10 months later, according to the Indian calendar, because we have not 9 months, but 10 months later in the text, it says that Mahadevi is then going back to her mother's home, which is still the tradition very much in India. And she stops at a beautiful garden, and she goes to a tree which is in bloom. Now we think it's a Sita Ashok tree according to the Chinese canon, and the Sala tree according to the Pali canon. So I put both the photographs up for you to see. They're both absolutely beautiful trees. And when she holds on to the branch of the tree, she is supposed to have given birth, standing up, which is quite normal. Now, lots of people are born, every child is born. How do we know this child was born there? So what happens is that because the Buddha becomes important in his own life, people start making pilgrimage. Like I said, he offered that teaching in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra. So 250 years or so later, Emperor Ashoka, who is very, very influenced by the Buddha's teachings, after killing 4 of his brothers and killing another 100,000 people, suddenly has this change of heart. And he goes on pilgrimage to all the Buddhist sites. And he puts different pillars or different markers at different places. And so in Lumbini, he puts a pillar like this, saying this is where the Buddha was born. And on it, there's an inscription which says that he visited in the 20th year of his reign, and he exempted the local people an eighth of their tax, etc., and put a pillar there. Now, this pillar inscription the pillar was there, it was overgrown for a long time, a mound had come. So when it was sort of unearthed in the late 1890s, before that, what had happened was there was a man called James Prinsep, who in 1837 had deciphered this Brahmi script, because there's script in different places too. And so this is a very important inscription, because not only this, but many other Ashokan inscriptions, because it tells us that the Buddha was a human being. Ashoka, we know, was a human being. There are many, many territorial agreements he has with different kings, but the Buddha could have been a sort of mythical figure in some ways. So here we have the link with Ashoka and the Buddha, and it's very important to know that. And for me, knowing that the Buddha is a human being is a very key aspect of pilgrimage, of my own teaching, my own understanding, and knowing that the Buddha allows us, offers us a path of awakening in this very life. Now, we really don't know what the Buddha looked like. It's interesting. There's no depictions made of the Buddha, but we think that because if you put the political, social conditions around the time, we think he's a bit like that man or the young boy with his hands behind his back with a smile, looking quite cool. This is, it's just, we have lots and lots of stories about his life, but we do know that his mother, unfortunately, died when he was only about 8 days old. And that, of course, did create a lot of angst in him also later, as we know in some of his stories. So, now, one of the stories which I think is important in this is the story of the Buddha when he was a young boy called Siddhartha, when he was about 9 years old, and it was the first plowing of the season. Now, his father, even though he was the king or the Raja of that area, he was still a farmer, and his name was in fact Sadhodan, which means the one who grows pure rice. And the ritual plowing, the first plowing was always done by the king. So he was plowing, and the young boy was quite tired, he was getting hot. So he went and started playing with his friends. And when he heard a huge roar, he went to see what was happening. And he saw the plowing, and he was totally fascinated. He saw the plow cutting breaking the earth, and slowly noticed that the plow cut a worm in half. And then he saw a little bird come and pick up half the worm. And then he saw a bigger bird come and attack the small bird. And all this really disturbed him. And so he went to a tree and sat under a tree cross-legged. It was a jamun tree. And the Indian plum, actually, the Java plum tree. And he's sitting under the tree, and he gets into a very deep state of aloofness in a way, and feels a great sense of happiness without actually wanting anything. And this is an important experience he has, because he picks this up later. But he also, when he opens his eyes and his mom is sitting there, now I should say his stepmother, because his mother and his mother's sister, Prajapati, were two sisters from the Kolya kingdom who were married to the king. So there were two sisters married to the king. And when the birth mother of Siddhartha died, Mahadevi asked her sister to please look after the young baby. And so his stepmother, or now in a way his mother, is sitting there, and she looks at him, and he opens his eyes and he says, how does all that chanting which has been going on help the little worm and the baby bird? And his mother, of course, starts crying, because she realizes that this boy has something quite special, and he's going, and the father is not very happy about this, sort of shakes his head and walks off. Now, we know, many of us know the story about the swan and the bird that the Buddha heals. And we slowly start finding more and more about his character as a young boy, the compassionate one. But of course, as his father is not keen that he become some sort of a, I don't know, floozy guy, as I would imagine his father thought. So, well, best is to just get him married off. That will get him sort of more settled. And so they look for an appropriate girl, and they find this wonderful girl who's actually part of the larger family in a way, Yashodhara. And they both are 16, they get married, and but one unusual thing happens, and these slides I'm showing you are of sites which are associated with the Buddha's childhood. Kapilavastu in both cases, one across in Nepal, one across in India. And so what is unusual is that the Buddha really, they didn't have a child for 13 years. Now, at that time, and even now, you can imagine people get married, they have children quite soon, but not. So I think somehow they probably had an understanding that maybe once a child is born, the Buddha will leave. The Buddha is already, he's not the Buddha at that time, he's just Siddhartha. Siddhartha is very concerned and interested in all these spiritual matters. He wants to go and meet teachers. The best teachers are in the south, in Rajgir, in Vaishali, or in Sravasti, in the west. So he wants to go and meet these teachers, and probably he's made his deal with his wives that he says, okay, once we have a child, I'll set off. So I like to think of it as a bit of a love story. And then, of course, when he goes, he does say, I'll come back if I find the way. It's not that he's abandoning his family in that sense. But in fact, I put these two birds, the photo of these two birds, the Saros cranes, because actually they're in that area. There are a large number of Saros cranes around Kapilavastu. And in fact, the local people really don't harm them because they're known for marital virtue. They always pair together for life. If one dies, the other one is very bereft, sometimes dies themselves. So I think the Buddha probably didn't get the message from the two birds, but he set off home. And he sets off at the age of 29. Now, this picture showing Kanthaka, his horse, Channa, his charioteer, and they've set off. He's now going to cut his hair and give it back to Channa. Channa is crying, Kanthaka is crying, and Kanthaka actually dies out of grief later. But this is his way of saying, okay, I need to now go and find the way out of this existential suffering. All of us have this existential angst. We see death around us, we see sickness, we see old age. And what is this? Is this just a human condition? Can we come out of this sort of suffering? And so he wants to find the way out of these things. He's seen this around his life. And it's happening today. Young family, children of many families have these same existential issues, saying, I've got everything. I've got my money. I've got the good house. I've got all the accoutrements of so-called happiness, but I'm still dissatisfied. And I think the young Siddhartha was not different that way. He was, a sort of yuppie of his time in a way. He sets off, and I'm doing this whole story in the sense of the sites associated with the Buddha, so you can actually get a sense of the sites, and then hopefully I might be able to offer some more teachings. I'm also doing this a little fast because we have a lot of slides, pictures to show, and he has a long life of 80 years. But anyway, he sets off from home, and we know that at the age of 35, he sits under the tree, and under the Bodhi tree, where he gains awakening. So for these 6 years, what does he do? Now, he meets many different teachers. We know the names of at least two. We know the name of Alara Kalama and Udaka Ramaputra. Now, Alara teaches a form of deep concentration. It's a sort of yogic concentration. People say that 500 bullock carts go in front of him, and he's so deeply absorbed that he hardly notices. Um, Udaka teaches a form of Upanishads. Then he comes, we don't know if you ever met Mahavira, we probably didn't, but Mahavira was a contemporary. Mahavira, the founder of the Jain religion, and in the Buddhist text, he's called Nigatha Nagaputta. He practices what Nigatha was teaching to some degree, or what Mahavira was teaching. These ascetic practices, deep ascetic, feeling that the body is actually a trap to the realization of the soul. There was a very deep belief in the idea of a soul. Now, he describes this period of his life with a lot of description. He says he hardly ate anything. He ate hardly what was in the hollow of one hand. He ate also strange food, including his own excreta. When he touched his stomach, he could touch his backbone. His head is like a shriveled gourd. His buttocks were like the hooves of a horse. His ribs were like the rafters of a dilapidated building. His eyes like sunken wells. So he, lots of people like talking about their suffering, and I don't think he was very different. But that was his description of what he was. And through all that, he didn't find a way out of suffering. He felt, I've still got all that. And so it's interesting that at that point, I feel he then remembered, and he does not just me, it's actually, he says, I remembered my meditation when I was 9 years old, when I got into a state of happiness without self-indulgence or self-denial. They're both linked to sensorial experience. There can be a happiness with not grasping, just being. Just being is a wonderful way of being happy. We already have all the conditions of happiness as we come more and more back into the moment. Eyes to see, ears to hear, and even, so we have lots and lots of conditions of happiness here and now. So he starts realizing that. That is not awakening itself, but that is an opening for awakening. And so he says, I'm going to let this go. And he goes off down the hill from the cave in what is now known as the Tungeshwari Mountains, down towards the Nirajara River, towards what we now know as Bodh Gaya. And he is so weak, he's bathed, he's climbed up using a branch of a tree to just come up, and then he's collapsed on the ground. And there's a young girl called Sujata who is taking some kheer, some rice and milk porridge, and she's going to take it as an offering to her tree god, and she sees this man dying. And so she just gently puts a little bit in his mouth, and slowly he revives, and that's how he sits up, he eats a little bit more, and then he starts talking to this young girl. Now, when he was practicing his asceticism, he wasn't alone. He was practicing with 5 other ascetics. And they see him now eating, talking to this young girl, and they think, my gosh, he's had it. He's lost it. So they leave, and he hardly notices they've left. So they've gone. And the next thing we know is that the Buddha is now walking towards the Bodhi tree. Why I show the next slide is because when you go to the village today, this photograph was taken in a village called Bakror, which is actually the village where Sujata was. And this young girl is about the same age as what Sujata would have been at that time. And so it's interesting, when you go to the sites, we don't only have to touch the historical Buddha, but when you start seeing the places that he was in, the cave, the river, the people he met, the Buddha doesn't become somebody 2,600 years ago. You start meeting the Buddha today. And the Buddha wasn't the Buddha 2,600 years ago. The Buddha was the Buddha in the present moment. So we have to be aware that that ability to awaken is there in all of us in this moment. And when we meet the historical Buddha, he offers us a sort of a template, an inspiration that we can go in that direction of awakening. So the Buddha walks from, now that he's a little more nourished, he goes towards a tree which is near the flowing river. And today we know this as the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya. And he sits down under the tree. And what I show you here is what is called the Vajra Asana, which is put there probably by Emperor Ashoka. It's a piece of sandstone grey sandstone, and we think that the Buddha sat exactly here. And it's a wonderful place to go. This is an old photograph. You see there's a lot more razzmatazz around it now, but it's a wonderful inspirational place to go to know that the Buddha sat under this tree and what he awakened to at that point. I think it's important for us to, okay, sorry, I put this one in because, when the Buddha was sitting under this tree, there was a young boy, a buffalo boy, and he used to offer the Buddha kusha grass and to sit like a cushion, like a meditation cushion. And so this grass grows all over the place in that area by the river, etc. So it's very nice. And even today, young novices who take on the paths of the Buddha, put little bits of kusa grass in their meditation cushions. So I just thought it's a nice photo to show you that, we see the living history of the Buddha with the trees, with the grasses, with the rivers, with the caves. And then when you sit under the tree, for example, you feel the breeze, you hear the sound of the tree, of the leaves. When you sit under a Bodhi tree, it's like a what do you say? What's the word? It's like when you pass air through some sort of a bells. Anyway, it's like that. It's a wonderful sound, and it's a very meditative sound. But for me, what I see as the Buddha, when he talks about his time under the tree, he does something very interesting. He sits under the tree and he looks at the leaves. And I don't know if you can see. Okay, I don't know if can you see my? I hope you. So this is the leaf of the Bodhi tree, and when the Buddha sees this leaf, he looks very deeply at the. Rupinderji, can you see the leaf? Can you see?
Yes,
I can't.
Yes, you can see the leaf. Yeah.
So when the Buddha sees this leaf and he looks up and he talks about it, he says, "What do you see in this leaf?" And when he looks deeply into it, he says, I saw the sunshine. I saw the cloud. I saw the rain. I saw the wind. I saw the parent of the tree. And in this way, he starts touching into the whole interconnected universe, which has made this leaf come about. So the leaf becomes a teacher for him in that sense. And so when we look deeply at that, he says, wow, this leaf has that no self nature because it doesn't have an independently existing entity. Everything, it is coming because of conditions arising. All sorts of causes and conditions have brought this beautiful leaf to come together, come to be. If I take one of those elements out, if I take the wind out, or the sunshine out, or the warmth out, or the earth out, this leaf won't be there as it is. And he says, well, what is I see in the leaf is exactly what I see in my body. I'm no different. That same nature of the leaf is the same nature of my body. There's nothing which is independently existing in me. And he calls this pratitya samutpada, or we call it dependent origination, or the understanding of anatma. This is a very, very key teaching of the Buddha found under the tree. And so when we go to sit under the tree, we see the tree as our spiritual ancestor. The tree is not just a tree for us. The tree sat with the Buddha day in and day out for 49 days initially, and then after awakening another 49 days. And it's just a wonderful experience. And what's interesting, in the Buddhist world, we call this the navel of the earth. What a wonderful description for an image that from here comes all the connectedness through the universe. And I think also to know that everything is because of everything else. This dependent origination is a key teaching. So for me, coming to the tree is a way of saying thank you, but also a way of saying, can I awaken to that in myself? And we can. Many people have come before people like us. This is around the 5th century. Somebody built a beautiful temple, the Mahabodhi temple, which I think in 2002 was then adjudged as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And it's a wonderful place to circumambulate, to go and sit. it's very powerful energy. And what also happened is that the Buddhist world, we have nearly 500 million Buddhists in the world. And, if you recall in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, the Buddha says, every Buddhist, or you should go to the Buddhist sites. So what's happened is that many countries have set up their own temples. In fact, today, I got a note from a friend saying, we have 55 monasteries now in Bodh Gaya. So this is the monastery from Thailand, which was given, this land was given when Mr. Nehru, our first prime minister, held a conference in 1956 to celebrate the 2500th anniversary of the Buddha's birth, according to some traditions, and they gave land to different countries to build up their temples and their monasteries. The Thai temple was built in 1957, but this is built by the Daijokyo sect. It's now become a very strong image of Bodh Gaya. It was built in, I think it was inaugurated in 1989. I remember seeing it being built by Mr. Subba, who was in the Daijokyo temple at that time. Now, so I should say, now when the Buddha gains awakening, it's a phenomenal time for him. He's been on this search for 6 years, and he then thinks, he sits there 7 weeks, and one of the weeks, there's internal doubt that comes up within him. People call this that Brahma Sahampati comes to meet him, but I feel it's an internal doubt. And one of the, it says that please teach, because some people will die of ignorance if you don't teach. And he says, my teachings go against the grain, they're counterintuitive. It'll be very wearisome to teach. And then Brahma Sampati says, or his internal doubt says, well, some people will learn, will get the teaching. So please teach, otherwise they will die in ignorance. So out of this great compassion, what we call this Mahakaruna, he then decides to teach. Otherwise he could have just, done peace and love and gone off on his own. He could have just had a nice time. And then he thinks, who will understand? So he thinks of his first two teachers, Alara Kalama and Udaka Ramaputra. So he meets an Ajivaka. Ajivakas are determinists who were another type of sect at that time, who's coming across in that area. And he says, do you know Alara, do you know Udaka? And he says, yes, I know them, and they both died recently. And then he asks them, do you know the 5 ascetics? And he says, yes, I know them. They are in the deer park in Isipatana near Varanasi. So then the Buddha said, I know they will understand. And so he decides to go there. So he goes these 250 odd kilometers, walks there, says it takes him 2 weeks, and he then comes to the deer park in Sarnath. Now, why I'm showing this slide is partly because of the stupa, which is where the Buddha is supposed to give in his first teachings, but also to show you the pilgrims from Sri Lanka in the foreground. We have probably now, I was doing some work, as Ms. Bra said, with the IFC and the World Bank, trying to work out how many pilgrims actually come. And we worked out actually only about maybe 250,000, 300,000 pilgrims a year come to the Buddhist sites from foreign countries, whereas the population of Buddhist sites is 500 million. That's only about 0.05%. I mean, it's minuscule. So I think we feel that the potential of tourism is huge. And it's how we invite these friends, our Buddhist brothers and sisters from the large Buddhist diaspora around the world. But for me, it's not just meeting the other friends and other Buddhists, which is a great joy. I love going there to meet other Buddhists from other traditions. We call it Buddhayana. It's not just Mahayana or Hinayana or Theravada or Vajrayana. There's a Buddhayana. And the Buddha links us, and the Buddhist places link us. And the Buddhist teachings, like this first teaching that he gave at Sarnath. So when you go to the Dhammek Stupa, you get inspired. So when I go, for example, I teach exactly what the Buddha was trying to teach at that time, what his own insight was. And we sit exactly like the Buddha sat. I'm sitting under a neem tree. There were neem trees at the time of the Buddha. And what a joy. I mean, there's nowhere else in the world that you can experience that. Sitting in the shade of the coolness of a neem tree and sharing or hearing the teachings as the Buddha talked about the middle way, about the 4 noble truths, about the 8-fold path. And we know that the Buddha talked about the primacy of suffering, He talked about how to look at the cause of suffering. It's like a disease, like a doctor might see, okay, there's a disease, what is the cause? Then you say, oh, is there an antidote? Is there a cure for this? And he says, yes, there's a way out of this disease. And then he offers the path, the Eightfold Path. But the Buddha's teachings are important in this context because he's not only talking about suffering, he's talking about well-being and joy. Because when you, in the third noble truth, when you remove suffering, when you remove dis-ease, when you remove illness, you get well-being and ease and happiness. That third noble truth is very important because sometimes people say, oh, Buddha talks only about disease, suffering, it's a pessimistic thing. But actually, it's like darkness and light. You can't remove darkness and not get light. One is because the other is. So this is very important to understand that in the context of our lives, this is because that is. The left is because the right is. People say, oh, I don't like left-wing politics. Well, you have right-wing politics. I mean, one is because the other is. There's not, you can't just remove the right and say, if I take a pen, for example, and say, okay, I don't like the left. Well, okay, I'll cut it. Well, there's still a left. So in that way, we always have to think that the left and the right, or this and that, are interbeing. And so the Buddha's great teaching is, this is because that is, and this is not because that is not. It sounds esoteric, don't worry. And then what the Buddha taught was the Eightfold Path. And in the Eightfold Path, he talks about ethics, about concentration, and about insight. And that's how he develops from, skillful speech and skillful action and skillful livelihood, moves on to effort and concentration and to mindfulness and view. So, but this is another whole talk. But it's wonderful. Just come and sit under the trees, even if you don't hear the teachings. You will hear the teachings in the birds, if nothing else. Now, the museum close to the site of the deer park is a phenomenal museum. It's one of the first site, I think it's the first site museum in India, 1910 or something. Beautiful architecture, and the pieces in that museum are some of the best iconic pieces of India, including of the Ashokan pillar, which is, the national emblem of India. But for me, this statue of the Buddha sitting, giving the Dharmacharya Sutra, the first noble truth, second noble truth, third noble truth, teaching his 5 disciples at the bottom of the photograph, and a woman who is probably the donor and her child. In the middle, there's the wheel. He's turning the wheel of the law and the deer. So it tells you the situation, who's listening, and then how he's offering the teachings. It's, and each of these, what we call plastic art, of course, even though it's stone, we call it plastic art. This is a wonderful teachings, and they're all anonymous. In Indian art, it's not necessarily saying this was the artist. We're showing that this is the 5th century Gupta period. People are making this out of devotion, out of a sense of offering. And so it's a wonderful tradition we have in India. And this is one of my favorite statues in the world, actually, of the Dhamacharya Sutra offering the teachings in Sarnath.
Since we are in the museum, there's a question I'd like to just interrupt you here. Someone has asked that once I visited the National Museum and saw a Buddha with an bow and an arrow. Is there such a Buddha, and what does it really connote?
Yeah, I think that is of the Buddha as Siddhartha Gautama. And so Gautama was the clan, and Siddhartha was before he became the Buddha. And that's probably depicting the moment when he's, the swan story, where he shoots the swan, and, well, actually not he, where Devadatta shoots the swan and he collects it. So he was a young boy who was a martial, he was taught martial arts. He was very good at running, very good, so he was good at bow and arrow, etc. And this would have been his training as a child.
Thank you.
So now next to Sarnath is Varanasi, which we know, and of course here is a deeply religious site for the Brahmanical tradition, and people are here bathing. And of course, the Buddha's teachings were a bit antithetical to some of the Atma teachings here. So when he was asked, one story was about people bathing, and they said, well, he said the most holy people must be the fish and the turtles. The real cleansing happened within. with ethics, with shifting your habits, with shifting your. So he had a sort of naughty sense of humor, I guess. But basically, the cleansing should be internal. But it's a wonderful place, and Varanasi actually exudes another whole energy of spirituality. And even if you don't want to do ritual, you can even immerse yourself in the Ganga like this, and it's so much fun. Now, the Buddha goes back to Rajgir, which is, he goes back to Bodh Gaya first. There he meets his, there's a whole lot of Jatilas who then become his disciples. They're called the Kashyapa brothers. And then he moves to Rajgir. Now, Rajgir was the capital of the Magadha kingdom at that time. And this is an important place because the king, King Bimbisara, comes to visit the Buddha, as kings did at that time. The spiritual leaders didn't come to the kings, but the kings went to the spiritual leaders. And when he meets the Buddha is a young man. Buddha was only 35, 36 at that time. And there's a very much older teacher next to him called Uruvela Kashyapa. And everyone's confused. And so then, anyway, Uruvela Kashyapa bows to the Buddha, and then the Buddha speaks. And at the end of the discourse, the King Bimbisara says something very nice. He says, I had 5 wishes in my life, and now all 5 wishes have been fulfilled. The first was to be king. The second was to be able to be visited by an awakened person. The third was to be able to welcome and show respect to that person. The fourth was to be able to hear his or her teachings. And the fifth was to be able to understand those teachings. And now all my 5 wishes have been fulfilled. Please come to my house for lunch, etc., etc. And then he offers the Buddha this, what we now know as the Venuvan, the bamboo grove, which is where the Buddha spent his second rain retreat. Now, and consequent rain retreats too. And so there's a lot of things that happen in Venuvan. And here we know that his famous disciples Shariputra and Mahamoggallana meet him, but also a merchant called Anathapindika, Anathapindika is from Sravasti, which is the capital of the Koshala kingdom at the time. So, and Anathapindika invites him there. Now, from Rajgir to Sravasti is about 600 kilometers. So, but the Buddha just thinks nothing of it, just walks. And I've done a sort of workout that he must have walked about 10 kilometers a day. He always did walking meditation. And so we've been developing tours and walking tours, which are wonderful. They're literally in the footsteps of the Buddha. And when we walk mindfully, when we walk in walking meditation, we are touching, imprinting our footprint where exactly the Buddha walked, but actually our feet can become Buddha feet. When we are present totally with our mindfulness, then we are imprinting our mindfulness, we are imprinting our presence, and we are really in the present moment. And that allows us to touch what the Buddha was touching. And it's so wonderful to walk actually where he walked. And of course, India is the great teacher. When you walk, you meet India. And I always feel that it's wonderful that India is the teacher, and we go to these places in the context of the Buddha's teachings. So we understand India, we understand ourselves in the context of the Buddha's teachings. And then we come to a place like Sravasti. This is where the Buddha was offered this land. It's called the Jeta Grove by Anathapindika, who is supposed to have laid out gold coins on the land so that he could buy it from Prince Jeta. And it is an absolutely wonderful, wonderful place. In fact, and the Buddha gives many teachings there. He teaches this discourse on happiness, Mahamangala Sutra, the discourse on the full awareness of breathing, the Anapanasati Sutra, etc. So I was thinking that at this point, I would like to just share a minute or two of a practice of meditation, what the Buddha taught at Sravasti. And those of us who are sitting on a chair or on a cushion, if you would like to just sit with a slightly straighter posture, just being aware of your body in this moment. And I will invite a bell, a sound of a meditation bell, and I will guide you for the next minute or two through this meditation. So just be aware of your posture. Feel the solidity of your posture on the chair or on the ground. Try and sit a little more upright. So you can feel that stability of the mountain in you, but not to be stiff. Sit with a sense of ease, sense of relaxedness, shoulders relaxed, hands can be in your lap or on your knees, eyes can be closed or half open, but with an internal gaze. And with the next sound of the bell, just listen to this sound. Just being aware of the sensory experience of listening. And now come to the awareness of your breath. Breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. And breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. Is being aware of the whole length of the in-breath and the whole length of the out-breath. From the beginning of the in-breath to the end of the in-breath, the beginning of the out-breath to the end of the out-breath. Find it easier, you can just put your hand in your abdomen and just feel the rise and fall of the abdomen with each in-breath and each out-breath. Don't try and control your breathing, just being aware of the breathing as it is. Note whether it's short or long. Just enjoy your breath. Our mind wanders away, just bring it back to the breath. Being aware of this gift of life, the breath of life, can bring a gentle half smile to our face, to our hearts, to our eyes, knowing that we are alive, have many conditions of happiness in the here and now. And I'm going to invite one more sound of the bell just to close this very short meditation. So, dear friends, very short. We practice every morning, but of course much longer. But this was a teaching given, a practice given by the Buddha at the Jeta Grove, where he talked about 16 methods of breathing. You know, we're breathing 18,000 to 24,000 times a day. And how many of us are even aware of one of those breaths? And what a precious gift of life to each breath. And as we go through this practice of the Anapanasati Sutra, it teaches us how to awaken. So just using the breath. And so the breath, the body, the feelings, the mind, the objects of mind, and how to transform and handle our emotions, how to handle our perceptions, and how to be free. And all Indic civilizational philosophies are based around that idea of liberation. We have many different paths, and we realize that Buddhism is not exclusive. As I always say, Buddhism is made of non-Buddhist elements. We have learned from each other. So all these traditions interplay. But for some people, we find these sort of meditation practices are very helpful. And we've been offering them a lot during the COVID time. People not to get stressed. We are so caught in the past and the future. So I think it's a very important practice. Even just following your breath, lying in bed, putting your hands on your stomach, letting your breath come and go, it's a form of relaxation. And at the end, I put a little thing of Ahimsa Trust. It's where we do this meditation regularly. You can always write to us and join us if you feel so inclined. Now, it's interesting. The Buddha, when he's quite old, he's talking to Anand, his attendant, and says, well, let's go and watch the sunset at Vulture Peak. I mean, here is 1,600 kilometers away. He says, so off they go, walking for the next 2 months, right across the plains of India, and go to Vulture Peak. And this is looking at the sunset at Vulture Peak. What a sight. It is so beautiful. You sit there and you see the Buddha. What you're seeing is what the Buddha saw. And it's possible, it sort of gives you goosebumps. And so but then he leaves from there, and the Mahaparinirvana Sutra at the end talks about the last journey of the Buddha, starting on Vulture Peak, moving towards Vaishali, which is where he spent his last train retreat. And Vaishali, as many of us know, was also one of the first republics in the world, a form of government, the Republican form of government. And also it is where the first nuns were ordained. And here we see some nuns and monks from Vietnam. And that pillar is showing, with the line is showing the direction the Buddha took going north. He goes further north, he comes, this is one of the phenomenal stupas unknown to most of us in India, called at Kesaria. It is where the Buddha is supposed to have turned the people of Vaishali back because he's announced his death. And now people want to follow him, and he says, please go back. And he gives his bowl to those people. But also, this is one of the most important sutras were given at Kesaria to the Kalama people. It's called the Kalama Sutta, or Kalama Sutra. And it's the spirit of free inquiry of the Buddha. And if you have time, do look at it. The Buddha says, don't even believe what I say, what your texts say. You must try it. If it brings you happiness, it brings you others happiness, then that is a teaching. That's a very short way of saying it, but please do look at this wonderful teaching, especially relevant to our times. And then we go further north and we reach Kushinagar. Kushinagar is where the Buddha actually breathed his last, in the middle of a sal forest. And this photograph has a Sita Ashok tree in the front and a sal tree in the back. The birth tree and the death tree. And it's important to remember, the Buddha was born under a tree, he died under a tree, he was gained awakening under a tree, got his kheer under a tree, lots and lots of important trees, Indic trees. And that's the stupa showing where the Buddha would have died. He died between two sala trees. These are the Shaurya robusta trees. So you can see these twin trees, and he would have lain between them, looking out towards the west, towards the sunset. And this is inside the Mahaparinirvana temple. For those of us who, people are doing a quiz, but this is a non-quiz question, but those of us who can work out what is interesting about this photograph, please do write to us. But it's not one of the 5 quiz questions, but it's an interesting thing about this particular photograph. Just to say that the teachings of mindfulness, the teachings of the Buddha are alive in India after 700 years of being dormant. And we've set up a mindfulness practice center in Dehradun, which is a center for trying to bring teachings to children, to the police, to teachers, and a place where we can touch peace and happiness within ourselves and bring that to society. That's all for now, as it were. If these are our contacts in terms of people who would ever want to go on a journey like this, it's not important where you go, it's how you go. And so I think that's very important to know, that you can do this like a retreat on wheels. Practice meditation in the morning, reading sutras, teaching, learning from each other, and going as a community, going as a sangha. It's wonderful practice. You then start traveling, not just with one pair of eyes, but with with 10 pairs of eyes or 20 pairs of eyes. And you're seeing the same thing, but everyone has their own perception. So it's a wonderful path of practice. I would say go every year, but at least once in your lifetime. And so that's why I put the buddhapath.com. There are many, many organizations organizing these journeys. We do it in our own way, very much like a retreat, a practice. And I put Ahimsa Trust as something which is a non-profit. We just do that, offering meditation retreats and practices to people who are interested. So if you're interested in this sort of path of awakening, then please do join us, whether through Buddha Path or through Ahimsa Trust. And I will close now because I know that we are supposed to finish in a few minutes. So thank you so much for your patience, your listening. And if there are any questions, I would be happy to take them. And if you don't have time, I can respond to them later.
Thank you, Mr. Seth. I think that's been an incredible journey. As we expected, it's been a journey which has made us more serene. Even those couple of minutes of meditation, I'm sure the viewers will agree, had a very different kind of a resonation behind them. So thanks once again. Yes, indeed, there are many, many questions. But before we take the questions, just to put things together in a perspective, I want to just tell all the viewers that if you're looking to go to the sites of Buddha or do the Buddha steps as a tour or as your travels, then of course going to Bodh Gaya is a must. And then Rajgir, Nalanda, Varanasi, Sarnath, Lumbini, Kushinagar. Incidentally, Kushinagar is one of the latest international airports to be announced. It's been a national airport, but recently the Honorable Prime Minister made an announcement that it's going to be upgraded to being an international airport. And then of course, Sravasti and Agra. The IRCTC runs a Buddhist tourist train. It's an 8-day tour. You could take that. And so there are so many other ways to travel, but to travel and do visit these places. And as Mr. Seth said, when we go there, I haven't been there. I think you need to be blessed in many ways to be able to visit these places. When you go there, you just don't go with your two eyes, but you go with your whole being. So many questions. I'm going to try and take some. And one question, and that's one of the larger questions, is that how do you weave together the life of a karma yogi and the whole philosophy of renunciation?
It's a good question because it's actually about my life in a way. I'm both a grahasti. I have to earn so I send my children to school, etc., while also being interested in this practice. I don't see the Buddha was very skillful when he had not just monks and nuns, he had lay women and lay men as students, and he taught them about things like right livelihood. Right livelihood is a way of making your livelihood in a way which links to your ideal of compassion. So I feel so grateful to be able to do a pilgrimage, lead people on this journey as my livelihood. I couldn't hope for a better thing in my life. So I think we have to see how I was in the footwear industry, I was in the corporate sector, I was in politics, I was in bureaucracy, I worked in the UN. I've slowly been working myself into a form of right livelihood. And that, I think, is how you combine karma yogi with a sort of jnana yogi. But I think it's also important to realize that being a father, being a brother, is part of our practice. We are not renunciates. We are people. I'm a Dharmacharya who's been ordained as a lay teacher, but I take all the same vows pretty much as the monks, except celibacy. I take responsible sexuality. So these practices are not about letting go of the everyday life. And in fact, the Buddha says, you must act in the middle of the world. We have to act out of our compassion, out of our mindfulness. And so even monks and nuns actually are not leaving society. They are putting all their energy so that they can help others rather than leave society. So I think there's a little bit of a misnomer about being a renunciate. And that's what I was trying to say. The Buddha taught about how to be awakened by this realization of interbeing. Your happiness is my happiness. Your suffering is my suffering. I can't discriminate by religion or by caste or by country, by gender, whatever. I am here because you are here. You are here because of me. So it's that interrelationship that I was trying to share when I showed the leaf. So there's a way of sharing that when we act in our karma as a karma yogi, we act for the benefit of all, and with as much goodness as we can, as much ethical kindness as we can.
I think that's also about the mindfulness of the Zen Buddhist lineage that you've actually been ordained in by Thich Nhat Hanh, isn't it? It's about discovering the Bodhi in you. As you already said, all of us have it in us. And it's for all of us to push it, to nudge it. Sometimes dramatic events, tragedies push it. You don't have to go through that, right? You can very well sharpen those things that are there very much in us. Thank you for that reply. There's another question, and actually there are so many. So let me just give them 2, 3 at one go to you. One is that there is no picture of Buddha. So how do we have Buddha personified in the way that we see him? And what is the motive at Sanchi of Shalabhajika? Tell us about its association with Buddhist ideas. And despite scripts and writing, why was Buddha's story written only 300 years after his death?
Okay, let's there are 3 questions there. So the first was about, sorry.
The face, how do we give the face to Buddha?
Yes, so the thing with the face is that there were no images made of the Buddha in his lifetime and he forbade it. We know that when the Greeks came, they had images of Greek gods, and they were the first Buddha statues were developed in Gandhar. And if you look at them, they look actually like Apollo, and then they with mustache and looking very macho. And then slowly, each country has developed its own cultural iconography around the Buddha. So if you see the Gupta Buddha statue, Gupta period Buddha statue I showed you, that's 5th century Indian Buddhism. But if you look at that other big statue I showed, that's Japanese Buddhism. And what is nice about the Buddha is that he's been, in a way, incorporated in different cultures. If they started showing a Japanese Buddha statue to all the Indians, it wouldn't mean anything. I've just showed an Indian one to the Buddhists, to the Japanese. But it's not just the iconography, it's the teachings have been universal. You're trying to translate the teachings to a culture. And so people have to recognize that face in their culture. So each culture, whether it's the Gandhars and the Greeks, who are also interested in Buddhism, or whether it's the Indians, I would like many more Indian Buddhist iconography. And I went to England a few years ago. I was teaching at something called the Buddhist Society. And I saw a beautiful Buddha statue looking like a European with a square jaw. He looked like a Western man. And I thought, wonderful. So, but I think as Indian tourism, we should advertise the Indian face of the Buddha more than the others. So I think that's one. The second question was about the Shalabhanjika. So the Shalabhanjika was actually, I think, an iconography taken from the tribal republics of the time, because we know that there were these devis, we thought of them as tree gods or goddesses, and the association of Maya Devi linked to that was because I feel it is a tribal culture, and Maya Devi was shown as a Shalabhanjika. So that imaging of her holding the tree and giving birth was an iconography taken from there. So that's why the Shalabhanjika links to the Buddha's story. And what is the third one? Sorry, something like that. What is the third question? I can't hear you, Mr. Brown. You're muted.
Oh, so sorry about that. There's one on which Ashokan pillar inscription talks about birth of Buddha.
Actually, the Lumbini one does, because it says that the pillar has been put there because the Buddha was born there in the village of Rupandehi. And it was put 20 years after by King Piyadasi, beloved of the gods. And we know King Piyadasi, beloved of the gods, was Ashoka. And as I said, that's very important because that's how we make the historical association that we say the Buddha was born, according to many traditions, in 563 BCE and died in 483 BCE. It's linking because we say that Ashoka came to the throne 218 years after the Mahaparinirvana of the Buddha. Then we work backwards from the date of Ashoka's ascension to the throne.
And what is meant by Tathagat?
So the Thagat actually means the one who comes from suchness, the one who is in the present moment. So it is a name that the Buddha gave himself. So the Buddha was known as Siddhartha as a kid. He came from the Gautama clan. He came from the Shakyan tribe. So he was known as Shakyamuni. Or he was known as the Buddha because he was the awakened one. And then when he spoke about himself, he said the Tathagat, which basically means the one who comes from suchness, the one who is manifesting because of causes and conditions in this very moment. So it's a way of speaking of oneself in third person in a way.
Okay. So there's another question. Kaushambi, it's 75 kilometers away from Prayagraj. Is it also considered as one of the places to visit for teachings of Lord Buddha?
I'm not aware of that one, but you know, the Buddha traversed the whole area so much. He walked everywhere. So we know that he must have gone all across to Allahabad, Prayagraj, that area. We know he went to Kosambi, which is a phenomenal space. There was a huge story about a little, in fact, there was a problem in the Sangha in Kosambi. So we know he was there, and that's close to Prayagraj now. So I think there's in fact, I feel that India is a bit like a archaeological site. And I've actually been encouraging, I don't know whether I can say it, I've been encouraging that we do aerial archaeology. We start seeing where exactly the Buddha walked, where the Buddha, we have many, many sites. And for tourism, that is important. For me as a Buddhist, I would like to know where the Buddha stopped for lunch, who did he meet. A lot of our research was done 150 years ago by the British archaeologists and German archaeologists. And even a lot of good work. Sorry?
I was just saying that for a country that takes credit of the 7 most important sites out of the 8, I think the amount that can be done from tourism perspective and looking at 500 million Buddhist followers, you said, Buddhists in the world. Yes, I think we should be getting them to India to walk the footsteps of Buddha literally and owning up a heritage and, you know, going back to the roots, so to say, for them.
As the Prime Minister said once, I was hearing him, we'd gone on a talk, he said, this is the Buddha land.
Yes.
Look at this is Buddha land.
Yes.
Now they call it the Middle Land, but, and if you can look at it like that, if you can walk in the Buddha land, you don't even have to be a Buddhist. You can imbibe the teachings. And actually one of the nice things about the Buddha's teachings is there's no sense that you have to believe in a God. You can be a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu and still use the teachings like that little practice I did. I mean, it's wonderful. You know, everyone breathes. Whether you're brown,
there are people who come in from Sri Lanka. We've been trying and doing signages in Sinhalese, and we're trying to do signages in many other languages from our brothers and sisters from South Asia and Southeast Asia, and also from Japan. So we encourage everybody that do come and visit Buddha land. It's such a you know, a rich part of our own Indian heritage and culture, and we are so very proud of it. There are so many questions, but I'm going to try and take maybe 1 or 2 last ones. There is a question on, was the Vulture Peak the setup or the background for the Prajna Paramita Sutra, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra?
Yeah. See, there are lots and lots of Paramita Sutras or Prajna Paramita Sutras. But what we know normally is what a shortened version called the Heart Sutra, the Prajna Paramita Sutra. And this we say was given at Vulture Peak. But in my historical head says that actually it was a much later teaching that was associated with the Buddha. There were many, many Mahayana teachings like this on emptiness. It is one of the, it is the core sutra that I use for myself, is this Heart Sutra, the Prajna Paramita Sutra. It teaches us the deep teaching of emptiness, but I still feel it came historically later and then was alluded to the Buddha. But maybe I'll be decapitated for that. But I think there are lots of sutras like that, and they give them value because they were given. But it's also a little bit of a, yeah, it's a teaching to Shariputra by Avalokiteshvara in a way.
So I'm going to now push myself to take one last question.
Yes.
Can you tell us something about the last meal of the Buddha?
Yes. So the last meal of the Buddha is always a, sorry, I'm just trying to move this away. So the last meal of the Buddha is in the town of Pava, which was the capital of the Malla people. The Malla people, who still exist, had two capitals, in Kushinagar and Pava. And there was a blacksmith, we think, called Chunda, who gave him this food. Now, this food was specially made for the Buddha, according to Chunda. But it was bad. Now, it was called Sukara Mandava. Sukara Mandava, if you translate, means pig flour. So it could be a type of a truffle. It could be a type of mushroom, which a pig finds. And so we think that it could have been a bad mushroom. Most people translate it as pork. Now, that is also possible because the Buddha said, always accept what is given to you. It is, because if it's given with a genuine heart, don't, but, he encouraged vegetarianism, saying that don't, but if you know that an animal is being killed for you, or even if you suspect, don't eat it, but accept because that is the way somebody's offering. So it could have been either. My vote, as it were, goes for the mushroom, and because it must have been a delicacy, and the guy must have spent, but as soon as the Buddha tasted it, he knew that it was poisonous. And so then he tells him to bury it. And that to me also shows the humanity of the Buddha. I just love it. There's so many stories, like the Ajivaka who met the Buddha in Bodh Gaya, when Ajivaka says to Buddha, so who's your teacher and what is his teaching? And the Buddha says, I have no teacher, I found the way. And the Ajivaka says, oh, big deal, and walks off the other way. So even if the Buddha is standing right in front of you, you are not recognizing him because you're not ready. So, but I like that because he was just a human being. And the same with the story of his last meal. I think, but what it also teaches me, and I think as a practice we do with our children, with everyone in schools, is to eat mindfully. Be aware of our consumption. That is the deeper meaning, that whatever we eat, are we eating in a way that is nourishing well-being for others, for the planet, for issues of climate change, or are we destroying the planet and destroying ourselves in the process and future generations? So I like to look a little deeper in some of these teachings, not just, but for the purpose of this program, it's more the literal. And I hope I've touched a little bit more than literal. When we are closing, I would like to invite Three Sounds of the Bell to close after you've shared, just to give it a sense of arrival again.
Yes, thank you so much. This is a session none of us wants it to end. So maybe another time we shall have another one. And we'll just open it to the viewers to do questions perhaps, because there are so many questions that have remained unanswered. And we would be more than happy to have you again and share the wisdom with all those people who joined in and have so many thoughts to share. Some are actually not even questions, they are more like thoughts. So I'm going to close with two things, the Three Sounds of the Bell, and I'm also going to request for a 1-minute movie which needs to be played. But before that, I'm also going to remind all the viewers that next Saturday, 11 a.m., we're going to go on the food journey. So the food trail and how food takes you to the different destinations of India. So we'll be moving from the more philosophical part and moving to the food part, but that's what Incredible India is all about, viewers. How it beautifully kind of meanders and weaves through such deep thought and philosophy, and then it's going to take you back to food, and how food also, as Mr. Seth just said, reminds us about mindfully eating and how he has so nicely linked it up with sustainable living. I think that's what our culture is all about. We just have to awaken it within ourselves. Sometimes in all the noise around us, I think we forget. It's always there in us, within us. These are the basics of human life. We just need to knock them in just a little bit as reminders. So would you like to do the three bells before the movie or after the movie?
After the movie.
After the movie. So, Shilahu, could we run the movie very quickly and then we do the three bells and then we thank the viewers once again. And I'm going to not speak after that. So, I'm going to say namaste from this point on and going to see you again next Saturday, 11 a.m. with Foods of India. Thank you, Mr. Seth.
India, the land of Buddha. An extraordinary journey begins in this sacred place where he took his first steps on the path to enlightenment. This is the land where he first spread his word, where people heard, and where his life took shape. Discover for yourself the journey of Buddha to his final resting place. Immerse yourself in his life here in India, the land of Buddha.
Incredible India.
Just bring our awareness back to our breath. Aware of our mind and body in the present moment. And bringing a gentle half smile to our face.